Right, this is going to be another episode of ReScope, whatever number, it doesn't matter. Since it's an evergreen historical show, it's not really like you. By the way, it's not even a series. You don't have to watch the past ones. You don't find out like the origin story of Paladin by doing so. It's still just us talking about other people's careers. So, in time-honored tradition, let's start with the first topic. What is your first topic for this show?
So, I mean, we don't do these shows that often, and we did. I don't think we even did one last year, to be honest. So there's a lot of different historical things that happened, I think, that kind of brought around a lot of these questions that I have. So I'll start with the first one, and I think the talk of the town is Navi being the team of the year last year, winning that first major in Copenhagen, and amassing quite a number of finals in a row, and on the other side of the coin, I look at Falcons and I look at what they've done with Zonic and the kind of downturn that they've been having, and I mean he's been kind of put into the limelight now with some of the weird goings on with the Falcons roster right now. So I thought this was as good a time as any to kind of pose the question about Blade being the greatest coach of all time, and whether or not 2024's resume allows that consideration yet, or whether he needs more time, whether there are more titles that he needs to amass, or whether he's there already, considering how Zonic's legacy is kind of inverting in a lot of ways in the last couple of years.
The tough thing about this is I actually think this isn't as much of a slam dunk as people think. Like, I have a hard enough time with in-game leader where people just count rings only. Because, like, for example, people might have heard I have made the argument many times that unless I make special conditions, like if you notice, all my angles for Carrigan basically are things like no one else did it the way he did it, or he did a thing no one else did, or something unique about it, but it's not really like he was just the guy who like always made the best calls over it. I normally do still give Glaive the best IGL title, but the reason why I say that Carrigan not winning as many majors is significant is because he actually had the opportunity to win them. I mean, he was in 4 finals, bro. Like, if you actually want to look, he's had many more years where he had a chance to win a major than Glaive did. Like, you can actually argue he's had more teams and more lineups, all that jazz, right? So the problem I have is I actually think you have to do something similar with coaches. Like, I can tell you from sports, even though it's a controversial take, I actually don't always think it's just the coaches with the most titles that are the best. Like, there are a few, for example, like actually hockey's a pretty good sport. There's a couple who were in like some of the dynastic teams in like the 70s and earlier in hockey, where I've heard some people think the coach wasn't the best. It's just like it was someone where it was like a Robban situation, and he just was like, come on now, boys, and keep your heads together, and then you're going to play great in the second half, and just all that shit. And they're like, the players were just like a cracked out team of superstars, and then just won all the championships. In the same and the reason I bring up the example of Robban is I hope people can understand that there's a reason why Robban wasn't even nominated for Coach of the Year. The year FaZe won most of the tournaments, including 3 of the biggest ones you could win, and essentially had like potentially an era, depending on how you define it. So I do think we all intuitively know it isn't just like trophies. Because, for example, I mean, I'm pretty sure if I do a straw poll of actually experts in the scene, who are the top 3 coaches today, they're probably going to say Ash from Gamer Legion, believe it or not. And he is about a million miles, except that one time, from ever getting close to a major or a giant tournament. Like, the joke is if he even makes it like close to the playoffs, he probably balled out. Like, his team's probably sick. So I would say coach should probably include things like just what did you do with the pieces you had. If anyone saw a video I did recently on Kassad, the reason why I do think he's actually one of the best coaches ever is because if you look at some of the Renegades rosters he had, I'm not talking that one year either, bro, almost every year he like exceeds expectations, and he's just getting them like 2 stages in a tournament better than they should get, or they're getting like wins over teams with like Nico and Ziwu and stuff. So I think it's not as simple as assuming that, look, in sports, you just trust that eventually the best coaches get to the big teams and they get their crack at the big time, and then it's how many chances did they get, how many years. So with Blade, I would say the issue is, you have to remember he became a coach quite late. Like, if you even look it up, there's actually a confusing thing here that the Navi org did which is that they had him join Navi, but it's even listed on Wikipedia that initially when he joined in 2019, even though they were winning that, like, like Star Series and stuff, it's just listed as organization at that time. And it doesn't list him as coach until actually like September or whatever, which would be around the time, I think, of like Berlin or maybe slightly after or something. So the issue I have is, if I actually think his problem is he has the Ziwu problem, COVID robbed him of potentially like probably 4 majors, because there would have been one in the spring, one in the fall, then maybe spring, fall next year, then who knows, maybe they could have even been, no, I think about 3 or 4. 3 or 4 makes sense to me that you've been robbed of. So realistically, he's already actually had about 5 or 6 actual cracks at a major as a coach. Within that, he's won 1. He's had some all right placings, some of the others, and some that aren't even that great. So you're going off things more than just majors. I also do think you can't just only use majors, but I'm just showing how for that particular case, he can't really fuck with what Zonic's done in majors, because at the end of the day, he still did have simple for a bunch of those. You know, it's not like he didn't have the devices of the world, which is what I often say about Carrigan. And then if you want to, the problem is though, the angle from which I might be willing, and I probably would say I do think Blade is the best coach of all time, is if we change the conversation. I keep doing this thing, right, where I think almost everyone, when they say greatest, does mean including accomplishments and trophies. Even if they say they don't really mean the best player of all time. Or why wouldn't we just say the best? We say the greatest for a reason. Greatness is the idea that you accomplish things. So I think it might sound funny, but I do think there can be a difference between greatest and best. So greatest is Zonic in the modern day. I think his accomplishments are just unparalleled. He's got the Grand Slam. He's got all the majors. He's got the major back to back to back to back. He's got the major with 2 tweaked rosters. He even had a major with a different roster with a different player in. He worked a bunch of those players to championship form. By the way, none of them won before. None of them won after him. There's a lot of factors go for him. If you want to say greatest, I think he gets to be it. If you want to say best, the reason why I actually would be willing to say Blade is I think this last period, I already thought it was amazing what he did with the 2021 roster. Like, they didn't just shoot people in the head. They had amazing discipline. Strat book was definitely fucking super deep. The way they actually played off each other's roles was sick. But it's obviously even more emphasized in this modern team. I mean, I hope anyone watching Katowice or Basparty recently realizes they just don't have anyone close to a fucking Monacy of that team. Like, it's not even a discussion. Like, everyone thought JL was hot shit. Yeah, he is until he just isn't, and then all of a sudden he's not in the server. Bit can be amazing. He can also just have an average game. He's not like some wonderkind. So I do think what he did this last year is absolutely incomprehensible, because I think what you have to ask yourself is this. Think about that famous argument people make about Michael Jordan, which is that when idiots go, he played in a weak era. It's like, that's because he denied all the other guys the rings. So you guys don't get how good Charles Barkley and Karl Malone and Gary Payton were. Like, you just don't know. They were fucking sick. But the problem is Michael Jordan stopped the winning rings, so they look shit. Well, that's what you have to ask yourself last year is, look, he denied Carrigan a ring, right? What? That's ridiculous already. Like, Carrigan's one of the all-time GOATs. Then in the rest of the year, by the way, Vitality probably has the same roster now if fucking this guy wasn't around. Like, think about how many tournaments G2 lost to them. It was all year long. They only basically like beat him like sort of once at the end of the year or something. It was ridiculous. So to me, I actually think you look at what he did with this Navi roster, and if you want to say is he the best, like what I imagine he does day to day in each game, if we could listen to the timeouts, I think he would be the best. But if I'm going to say greatest, I think I have to give it to Zonic, because the accomplishment gap, I think he gaps everyone. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, that's completely valid. I really was thinking about this a lot more because of just watching the Cologne documentary that came out recently, and just listening to how he carries and leads a team in certain situations, crunch time situations, the way he handles timeouts, and how hard he is on his players, which I think is interesting. I think he gives them a lot of leeway in some situations, but he's very stringent in how he wants to kind of carry things around, and that's really impressive to me. So it made me try to look at the kind of the rosters that he's been given and what he's done with it. I even think about just the CIS Navi in general, and how they were dominant in the Stockholm victory, but then also trying to make do with the fallout of obviously the war that happened, and then having the different changes that came in and out of the roster, and how he handled that. Obviously, just the way he handled Flamey as a whole, he was obviously not necessarily the player that you wanted in that roster. He was very inconsistent. You tried to slide him out with that 6-man roster in bit, trying to go hand in hand with what Vitality were doing, and kind of revolutionizing the 6-man roster there, and then integrating bit completely, finding him to have different roles as well. I mean, he was a very headshot heavy, like just a mercenary of sorts in that 2021 roster, and now he's become kind of a jack of all trades in this new roster, where Blade has kind of integrated a system where all these riflers have different roles in different periods of the round, play this very fluid style of Counter-Strike that's very impressive to me. That, as you said, if you do not have a superstar, how do you win games? Blade has found an answer to that, and has found it in an era where there are so many answers that are there in so many different rosters with so many different superstars, like your Donks, like your Monasys, and that to me has to be given some sort of credit. So I see the kind of varied rosters in which he's succeeded, where I look at the CIS super team managing all of the egos and the styles of players that those guys have, and you look at what they're doing beyond that roster and that kind of the lightning in a bottle, and you look at kind of what Boomich has done, and then you start to think, how much has Blade done with Boomich as an IGL? Was he really that good of an IGL, or was Blade adding that extra 10-20% to become an elite player, an elite IGL in that time? Again, against the likes of players like a Kerrigan in crunch time situations, in those playoff situations. You think about the undervalued international roster. I mean, I can't stress this enough that when that roster was announced, people thought Navi was going to just end all of the records that they had of making playoffs and being a competitive roster and being considered any bit relevant in the world space. They thought it was foolish for them to do it, but the fact that Blade did it with inexperienced pieces as well and made them just absolute soldiers in an actual system and believe a system that is Alexi B. That to me is very impressive. And I think the other kind of harsh aspects of Zonic's tenure, again, all of these things that I'm talking about, by the way, are all these like nitpick things that I think kind of build in my kind of resume as a whole. That I think I'd agree with you that I'd say that he's the best coach of all time. On the Zonic side of things, I think about what he did with Vitality, and in some situations you would consider that the major that he won there should be the one that like denounces everything of all conversation. But to me, actually, I just think about all his time in Vitality, and I think that majority of it was pretty bad in all things considered. I see what they did without Spinks. It was pretty embarrassing. I've noticed that they've not been actually able to qualify to many playoffs. They were having these major teething issues as a unit. They struggled to have a real identity, and to me that screamed, again, lack of leadership. And Apex was still kind of learning how to be an IGL. Obviously, he had a couple years under his belt at that point, but he'd still not figured out how he wanted to lead an international roster. And I think that's where you as a coach have to take charge and find that identity in a roster. And they never were able to do it. They finally add in Spinks. Finally, things start to take off. They start to nab a couple of trophies. They peak at the right time. They do get graced with a much easier bracket than some might consider. So they didn't really have that kind of gauntlet to prove that they were that team that they were, regardless of how they were peaking into that major. And so that kind of takes down some notches for me, where I think about variety of rosters in which Zonic has been able to succeed, and it's actually pretty lackluster in that regard. So in that situation, I have a couple notches to take away from Zonic in that sense. But again, these are all kind of intangibles that go beyond just the raw accolades, that I wanted to pose this question, because to me, I just see the kind of work that Blade has put in terms of how he's had to master a roster with a language that he's not even originally proficient in. He had to become proficient in over a longer period of time after in the kind of that period between the CIS roster and the international one, and carry a system with an IGL that still hadn't had that breakthrough moment as a caller as well. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on it, and why I feel as though I do consider him to be my quote unquote best coach of all time.
Right, my question is going to be one that in theory casual fans should love. It's a great conversation to have, which is, will AWPers ever dominate the top players as a majority again? So obviously in the latter years of CSGO, the perception was it was all AWPers at the top. Like the joke was it really was between Zebu, Simple and Device, and then like Nico would have to play fucking like insane just to get like above one of those names. And so the perception at the time was, especially think the last year's Jame, KD, so it just started to get so that it felt like the AWP, I mean, it's obviously a plus minus fucking amazing weapon. I think the way that the old 1.0 or 2.0 rating worked probably benefited. So will it ever happen again? Like, will in CS2 we have a world where the AWPers are the best? Whereas now, obviously, the perception is there's two insane AWPers. They just have to be the best players ever. And then after that, people, I don't even know if people even put Wonderful. And that, I mean, some people even try to argue against Shiro, bro. They try to not have, he's trying to say he can't be top 5 or top 7 or whatever. So what are you at? What do you think about AWPers?
I think we can get back there. I think there's going to be a lot of teething for us to get there, especially when you look at the new gen and how they're approaching the op right now. I definitely think that they're trying to. I think they're trying to play copycat in a lot of senses. I don't think they've really crafted their ultimate playstyle just yet, and especially in CS2 specifically. When I look at Wonderful, I do see remnants of trying to play like Shiro, trying to end rounds like Shiro, a little bit more passive like him. You look at 9-10, still. I feel like I consider him more like a Monacy light, where he's trying to be a little bit more aggressive, trying to be a little bit more in your face, especially with that kind of brawly style that Mongols can specifically try to bring out a little bit. And then you kind of run out of questions. You're in terms of which players would you really put in that new gen. You look at Ultimate; he's pretty mediocre. He's not necessarily lived up to that hype. And then you kind of run out of names, and I think that there are a lot of talents within the kind of tier 2, tier 3 scene that are still developing, that are still trying to learn how to play the game at a high level, trying to carve out their identity in the game. And I think a lot of the old gen's performances have gone down as well. You look at Brokey not necessarily living up to the hype, Dexter having a little bit of a fall off, Device, Woxic, a lot of these old guard names that aren't reaching those same heights as they used to. So again, you don't have these breakout stars. You don't have these old guard players to look back on and say, this is how I should play. You basically got outliers in all sort of facets of the game. You look at Monacy and how he kind of breaks open the game. You look at Shiro with kind of how he's mastered the passive side of the game and how he tries to clutch up in certain situations. And then you look at Zaiwu, who honestly, I feel like he's less and less of an opera these days with how much he wants to opt in to rifle. Obviously, that's kind of swung back the other way recently, but still, in most situations, these guys are outliers, and you can't necessarily model your game out of these guys all too much. Now, I think that I wanted to give a comparison to a position right now in American football, where I talk about what I've noticed with running backs, where as of kind of like maybe a couple decades ago, maybe a decade ago even, where the running back position was pretty valuable. It was a huge component to a strong football team. It found a lot of methods to kind of win games for a lot of teams, but eventually over time, through kind of figuring out the position, neutralizing the position, having worse draft classes, it kind of fell away and it didn't become as powerful of a position. You started to see these elite quarterbacks take over the game and find ways to just win off of that position alone. But I think in this year specifically, I've noticed where a lot of teams have become these kind of run heavy offenses. Where I look at teams like this year's Eagles team with Saquon Barkley. You look at Josh Jacobs. You look at Derrick Henry. Of course, this is I'm getting into the weeds of things, but you see how a lot of these teams have now been opting in to play around that unit, and now run heavy offenses are becoming more of a possibility and find success in the modern day. So what I'm trying to get at here is that I think there are waves, there are ebbs, there are flows, and right now we're in a little bit of an ebb where we're in a new game, we're in a new era, we're still trying to figure out how that position is played in the modern day and try to go beyond outliers to find a way to say, how can we build around an AWP rather than an aggressive rifle right now that we have that's being modeled after in Spirit very effectively.
The problem I have is one of the things I think people don't acknowledge is, especially right now in CS2, I actually think two of the major factors, one is in the game and one is actually imposed on the game. So one is, it's just that T side is way stronger anyway because peeking is just way better with a rifle. And so it's the reason why you saw all those AWPers doing that little bitch session where they all just complain about how it's hard to hold the angle, etc. I don't think fans realise when they say that, by the way, they don't mean you in your game in matchmaking. They mean when you're holding like spools on Inferno as the CT AWP, they mean that when like Donk fucking peeks you, or Nico, they just instantly kill you in a way that's more frustrating and harder to hit than before. But the point is, they're the absolute most cracked out ones. And the problem is, in the modern day, there are a lot this goes hand in hand with it, incredibly powerful riflers. There are some insanely sick riflers with like instant headshot aim. Malbs, etc. comes to mind recently as well, added to that category. So even people like Bit, by the way, fucking fantastic if they peek into you. So one of the problems I do think is I think the peak is a little bit too strong for T-side now. I already, if people don't know, this is where being a boomer means that actually half the problems you all think you have now are actually just like the same problem we had before. I already thought CSGO itself actually had more of like a peak as adventure than 1.6. The joke is, I heard all these people do this conversation recently. You can't just hold an angle like you used to before. Bro, this entire people got eliminated from Counter-Strike, like Senya and fucking Lord from that. Like, they used to just do that all day long in 1.6. It was even more punishing to hold the angle and just spray into the guy, etc. So to me, the peak angle just made it way harder because now essentially you just die way more often and don't get the kill or get traded instantly. And then the other part is MR12. What people don't acknowledge is we changed to MR12, but we didn't change the economy. I mean, I know we changed it a tiny bit now with like prices of weapons and stuff, but it's not like we scaled the economy accordingly. And so just as I always tell people, you just get fewer full 5v5, both sides have guns, rounds. You also get fewer rounds with the AWP anyway, because that's the nature of the AWP. Like, think about it. In an MR15 game, I have a few games where I don't have the AWP anyway early on the round or when we're broke. But once I get it back, especially if I'm hitting, I have it for ages. Like in a game of CSGO, how often do you even really save the AWP nowadays? You know what I mean? Like the James of the world, that style's even gone. It's not really even a thing. So I actually don't really see like MR12 giving you as many options. I think I would also argue that the value of an AWP is more in MR15 because of the fact that when you have it and you're hitting, etc., you like don't have to buy it again next round. The plus minus angle is crazy. It's a mega efficient weapon. Efficiency doesn't seem as big a deal in MR12 in that sense. Like people like to force bind, play smash mouth CS. There's a lot of up tempo play, etc. So unfortunately, I do think like both of those things have affected it in some ways. I mean, there's also, by the way, a thing people were doing in the latter days of CS:GO, and shout out to Shocks. He almost like was one of the first people to do this even before Sanji. Is people would farm with SMGs on like forces and low buy rounds to then give the AWPer the AWP. You don't have as many rounds to farm. You don't have many rounds to throw away to then get the AWP, which is so powerful it can win you all the rounds. Like now it's just sort of like you have a force buy and everyone force buys. Like it's very rare. Think about how rare you ever see the old school AWPers buy. The old school AWPers low buy is a pistol. It's a 5.7 or a deagle, and it's like armor maybe, and a nade or a flash. Like that's almost not even a thing anymore. And in fact, I'd even say this. Try and picture any AWPer in your brain when he doesn't have an AWP. Right, you're instantly thinking of Wonderful with an AK. They all have an AK. Nowadays, actually, you have to... The joke of being an AWPer now is now you actually have to have like half-decent AK, otherwise you almost can't be an AWPer, I think, at this point in time. So I kind of feel like at the current state, no, I don't think it will come back. I do still think there actually are ways you could sort of like artificially make it more. I'll give you an example. I actually think because rifles are so powerful and peaking is on T side, I think people forget that when you actually hit a site with like 3 people and all come up the same angle, only the first person's really doing the peak, right? So actually the value of that isn't as crazy. So I'll give you an example. I've always thought the most underrated type of AWP, because they're not a superstar, is the AWP that goes second and just like trades or tags the guy like you're shooting. So if you think about if you go long A and you fight the guy at the long corner, well, while he's fighting your AK guy, in theory, your AWP has a very easy free shot on the side of the guy, just get a free kill. You could use it that way too. It's just that's not superstar AWPing, you know, and people mainly want star players to have the AWP. So unfortunately, I kind of feel like no. Like it could obviously be fixed tomorrow. If we went back to MR50, I think it'd be used more. If they change how aggressive, how hard the peak is, I think I'll change. So I think there's a bunch of things can change. But my vibe now is actually the way CS2 is. It's why I keep arguing and I think I did a pretty good job last year. I argued very heavily way before everyone else got on the train. First of all, I argued for Wonderful when people said he sucked. I argued for Shiro when they said he's not top 5 and a true second star. And then I argued for Sun Pius long before actually he got kicked out of Falcons. And one of the reasons why is I had to keep reminding people, who are the good AWPers if you're telling me these guys aren't the best AWPers? Like, bro, there's only Monacy and Ziwu, and they're just the best players. Like, in fact, from what I've even seen of Monacy, if he wanted to force it, Ziwu, so he could probably AK2, mate. He could probably just be an AK. He's got a fucking amazing set of rifles. So I kind of feel like it's not happening. I feel like that's gone. And that just may be a factor of history, by the way, because I can tell you CS 1.6 was not about superstar AWPers. You had a couple that were insane. It's kind of like what you got now. The game was dominated by riflers. There's a reason why the conversation was Potty, Neo, and fucking Forrest. It wasn't Markov and Kogu and Delpan. They weren't in that conversation. They were considered like a table O in history.
That's fair. I mean, to me, I've just seen a lot from some of the oppers in like the lower regions, and kind of how they're playing with it, and they're playing with it like very aggressively from what I've noticed. Trying to find a way to nullify the peaker's advantage by peaking first, and trying to kind of just shut down the aggressive riflers straight away. And it's not as effective in some situations, but I do think that there is just a reframing of how the op has to be approached in either a huge extreme to one way or the other, be it super passive where you are playing it in a super like device-esque manner where you're rotating a lot. You're trying to use like those heat maps of kind of where players play, and try to use it very positionally. Or you could try to play it in a much more hyper aggressive manner where you're having plays set around you, where you're kind of blowing open smokes as much as possible. I've already seen this a little bit in kind of how some teams like to approach like middle on Dust 2, where they will use 3-4 nades to try to kick open that mid smoke and fight as early as possible. So I feel like we've just not figured out how we kind of approach the role. And maybe in this situation there might never be that kind of approach, because the potency of an aggressive rifle is just too overpowered. And you see that with kind of how Donk is approaching the game, that you can just frame every play around him and it could be fine. And you could just have Shiro kind of pick up the scraps at the end of the round and have it sorted out there and have him be more of a closer. Or, you can just approach it at an aggro rifler and make that the kind of key cornerstone of how you want to build a roster. But yeah, I still feel as though that there's a lot that some of these younger guys are developing slowly but surely. Whether or not these old guard IGLs want to actually utilize their AWPers in that manner is another question. But I do feel like some of these newer gen IGLs might have a little bit up their sleeve in terms of how they want to use the AWP, and whether or not these kind of players can adapt to maybe something a little bit faster in how they want to approach the kind of nullifying of Peaker's advantage. But yeah, I guess time will only tell.
Okay, what is your next question?
Sure. Well, Donk's rookie year, it was the talk of the town, of course, winning so many accolades at the HLTV Awards and kind of everybody's books as well. And I kind of wanted to contextualize it a little bit more, because I still feel as though, you have all these pundits talking about, oh yeah, I mean, this rookie year was unbelievable. It's definitely the best rookie year we've ever seen. But I think that this show is perfect for this kind of conversation, with contextualizing it and kind of discussing the greatest rookie years in history. How do they compare against this year in 2024? Is there anything that comes close? Is he truly breaking all of these records? And what can we kind of think about Donk moving forward and kind of realize his kind of greatness that he's shown over this last year?
One problem with this topic is, believe it or not, it's like Donk really is in a movie about the greatest Counter-Strike player ever. Because if you think about it, right, he did technically play like one of those bet boom lands at the end of 2023, which, look, we all count the bet booms now, if like Eternal Fire go there or Mouse go there, but we sort of, because it wasn't the one with Shiro, we kind of just say that doesn't really count. And we only really count Donk from 2024. And so essentially, one of the biggest problems we actually have in Counter-Strike, and this is going to sound, what's funny is this will sound to idiots like one of those shower thoughts, like, man, isn't it just like the clock's just like artificially imposing 24 hours? Maybe there's like 30 hours and, some shit like that. I'm not doing that though, but I'm pointing out it is literally arbitrary how long a year is. So for example, the best example, I'll give you a very quick example, is people don't get when they're younger players. I saw some people actually ask this, it's a valid question. They go, why is Kenny S so revered when apparently the highest he ever was on HLTV is like something like 6th or something in a year? And it's like, so how was he the best player? And it's like, oh, because it wasn't for a calendar year. Like what it was he was probably like the best, like back half of 2014, and then let's say like the first third to half of 2015, but that didn't get him a whole year. And unfortunately for him, 2014 was a very competitive year with a lot of amazing players that were super duper good. So, but if you ever did like a year which was from that period, he could maybe have been like first or second. So similarly, it definitely helps Donk that he started for real, at the beginning of a whole calendar year. Then he was in an elite team for the whole calendar year, and he qualified to all the. You know, he has almost every single thing going for him. And then also he was unbelievable and cracked out, and no one's ever really matched his level. So the real issue is there are very few players you can actually find. Like, by the way, you'll find the list for this is incredibly short. It's going to be way less than people think, because people are going to do things like this. Their brain is going to fuck up. They're going to think of the other number one players, and they're going to go, what about, like, first of all, Get Right doesn't count, does he? Because he was in 1.6. We're not counting that for CSGO. You're going to go Coldzera. Coldzera played like fucking the last third of 2015, and I tell you what, he wasn't the number one player. And so again, what am I doing with that? Like, am I counting part of that into next year? No, we're doing the calendar year. That's what we're doing here. Then we go to Simple. Like, Simple basically was like, not in top teams. He was very good, by the way, but he wasn't even in position to be playing in majors sometimes. In fact, he was banned from ESL majors if people don't know. You keep going down the line. If I go to like Nico also played like part of 2015 towards the back half. Also, by the way, Nico had actually been playing for years before that, but just not what we'd almost call tier 2. But that could sometimes mean you're at a LAN with tier 1. So you see what a nightmare it is. So basically, the funny thing is, there's a very simple answer. The best rookie year ever was Zero 2019 in CSGO for my money. It was just like, he was the number one player. He was cracked out. He was unbelievable. He didn't do well at the majors, but he did well at almost everything else. And that was one of his lowest fragging teams, even if they were all very polished veterans who could play the game, was smart, etc. He had to really like frag the fuck out. People know the differential on that year is absolutely crazy. So I think not only in terms of like eye test would he be right up there, but I think he's one of the only ones that sort of fits all the criteria. I don't think, remember, he also, by nature of the fact that he had some really experienced teammates, Vitality also was relevant almost immediately out of the gate. They almost made like top 8 the first major, then very quickly they got cooking. By the summer they won the best teams. So I think there's not many people actually on the board that can even compare. Like, I was trying to think of other ones. Coldzera doesn't do it even for the eye test. Nico would be there, but wasn't really there in terms of the teams. I think it has to be him. In fact, I struggle to even think of other ones, because after that, those are the greatest players ever that we had in CSGO. Like, who else have we taken at that point?
Yeah, I mean, all the other ones that I had come up with were players that aren't even necessarily like quote unquote the star of their team. Like, I think about Bit's campaign. He had 4 titles, 0 MVPs, number 9 of the year, 1.1 rating to end the year. And they won Cologne in that 2021. But even that 2021 was a little bit hampered by a little bit of online stuff towards the beginning of that year leading up to Stockholm. Again, you've got Simple, you've got Electronic on that team. They're still balling out. So it's not even like a definite kind of lock in there. I look towards Monacy in 2022. He was number 7. They won that. They came in second at Cato. He got 1 MVP at semis at EPL and a 1.17 as an AWPer. So that isn't necessarily even the kind of Monacy that kind of took over the game that we'd expect, right? That's the one that he's still charging up. He's still playing some of his first lands. He still doesn't have a solidified identity, but he's got flashes of that brilliance, and you know what's coming down the pipeline. But it's a very similar story to that of the kind of Simple and Coldzera story, where yes, they've got good starts to their career, but it's not necessarily the one that kind of blows everyone away. And then I'm kind of looking at like JW, where he gets a major MVP in his first year in 2013, but he's still only number 9 of the year. They win DreamHack Winter, but they don't really win that many titles. It's still a very stacked year in terms of competition, 1.09 as well as in terms of the year as a whole. So yeah, I mean, as a whole, there's really nobody else other than ZywOo, and everybody else is kind of like still kind of bringing up their career, still trying to blossom in some ways. So when you kind of look at this, I think you've got to realize how important Donk is in terms of his campaign of the year, and how much of a splash he's making to kind of destroy all conversation about the record books, about a calendar year, about how long it takes for a player to get used to the tier 1 environment. He's an extreme outlier in that sense with the number of MVPs as well, 6 MVPs. So he outstretches that of ZywOo's. Of course, eclipses his overall rating of the
And
year.
one was major
and
MVP too.
Right, and a major MVP as well, which I mean that was a tough road to win that championship. I'd argue that Shanghai Gauntlet was one of the toughest ones that he could have had, and he passes it with flying colors. So really impressive in that sense, all in all. So I really just wanted to take this question. I don't think it's necessarily an argument or a debate necessarily, but it's just to see and showcase how specifically great was this year as a whole compared to other calendar years, and you realize very quickly that there's nobody that comes close to this conversation, and that is truly how exceptional his year was, and how looking forward into 2025 when we try to continue that conversation and see, well, can he get better, can he stay consistent with that year that he had, that makes 2025 all the more exciting. But yeah, that's about it.
It's why when people who are only from League of Legends get mad that I say Faker shouldn't have been the player of the year, I always tell them, I can make a million arguments in League of Legends, but the obvious one is, you are aware Donk had probably the best CS year ever, and that's without even saying the word rookie. Like, I don't think people actually understand how insane that is. Like, even Wayne Gretzky wasn't actually like his peak year in the first year. No one was. No Michael Jordan, nothing. Like the actual miracle of it all is I just don't know how someone did it. Like, it's actually fucking bonkers. By the way, the joke is actually Faker's own first year was one of the best years ever. But yeah, that's now in Counter-Strike, we don't even do who had the best rookie year. It's is Donk's rookie year better than like Simple's best year, which is like, fuck. And that's like a real convo. And by the way, people come down on either side of that one. It's crazy. Right, okay, here's my question. It says, what? Now, look, I've purposely used words that we can interpret ourselves, so you can decide which one. Like the words top and relevant, it's up to you to determine. Which top player from the end of CSGO, so we're just talking about last year or two, do you miss being a relevant top player now?
So I have a lot, or actually, I boil it down to like three answers. So one is an aggressive rifle, one is an IGL, and one is just a North American player, because I just wanted to throw in a North American player in there. But the aggressive rifler, I was actually split between these two options. One was Config and one was Patsy. Config for me, I think, yes, he had his out of server issues, but I mean, man, there was something about this guy in the server that just absolutely, you just have no idea what this guy was going to bring to the table at every point of the game. I mean, I just think about how he how he revitalized the aggressive rifling on Ancient, and to this day, I still feel the way that he approached it on Astralis as well was so impressive, was so exciting, and it's something that is copied by so many top teams to this day, with how players want to approach the mid lurk, how they want to approach the red room, and how players get out of mid utility as fast as they do. And this is the guy that, through hell or high water, would always find a way to make his aggressive rifling work, no matter what the roster was, no matter what the circumstances were. And that to me is just a mark of a player that is just going to automatically elevate the X factor of a team. And I don't think people talk about it as much, because the stats conversation becomes such a heavy point of contention these days, where people look at the number, they see that he's not necessarily that he's not breaking the charts in that sense, but when you look at the eye test of this guy, he just absolutely erodes all of those conversations of what statistics mark a great player and all that bullshit. You see a guy that has just raw impact on a team, that can just completely change the dimension of a round, off rip in the first 20 seconds, guaranteed. The other aggressive rifler that I had was also Patsy. Where is this guy gone, man? I mean, this guy was an unreal sensation in like the semifinals of a major, absolutely tearing heads on Vertigo. If you recall, he gets that call up to Liquid, and everything kind of goes to shit. You don't necessarily see that level of brilliance ever again. Now he's on Paravision. I mean, I'm seeing this guy go killless in a whole map of Counter-Strike at Tier 2, no less. And there's no real end in sight for me that I see with this guy, that he's necessarily going to kind of come out the better end and kind of build his way back up. I think that he's come to this grinding halt as a player. But this guy also had a very similar level of brilliance on that Spirit lineup when you think about what they had at Antwerp with Dexter and with Wonderful. And unfortunately, he's just not there ever again. So he was kind of another player that I had in that list. Snappy was another one that I had I'm kind of bending the question a little bit, but he's got a decent team now with NIP. But I'm just disappointed with the whole Falcon situation and how that turned out, and how he didn't necessarily have everything that he could ask for in that roster. He didn't have full control. I think that he'd improved so much as an in-game leader on ENCE, where he kind of was a one-dimensional IGL in some sense, which he was good at, where he would call these out-of-spawn calls and they would go through with it and he would be exceptional and they would get some good results. But I think when they added in Nerds, he found a way to kind of let players off the leash a little bit more. He figured out how to mid to late round a little bit more. And I think he added just more dimensions that the conversation surrounding him was very quickly, can we get this guy to a G2? Can we get this guy to a top team and kind of lead the best weapons in the game? Because he had figured out all the dimensions that were possible. But unfortunately with Falcons, he didn't have that full buy-in. And I think he kind of lost his way a little bit. I think that with NIP, I think he's got some good pieces around him. I hope that he does bounce back there. And I do miss him as a whole, because I want more great in-game leaders to go fight against each other in the biggest of arenas again and again and again. I mean, at the time of the recording, Alexi B and Chopper played against each other again for the umpteenth time against one another. And that was just so exciting to see the kind of variations in how they like to play against one another, the mind games that you get. And top IGLs, I think, like Snappy at the time, were also providing that same level, that same caliber of exciting play. And then the North American player that I had picked out was Fang. This guy nabbed an MVP at the tail end of the online era, and honestly was very exciting, I thought, in the complexity, the jersey, and had this kind of mentality and this work ethic that I hadn't seen from a lot of players within the region, where you've got these players that are very willing to kind of spin their wheels and just exist in this ecosystem for as long as possible and hope that they get a call up. But this guy was a guy that grinded and showcased that he could kind of grind to that next level and play in the top North American organization. But ever since he joined that roster, he never necessarily had that same peak. I think eventually those kind of motivation issues did kind of boil back into the team. He had to go down into some lower levels after taking an extended break, which I think was a huge problem for his career. If he had started playing straight away and take that hit in the ego, maybe he could have come back and built back yet again. But I think he's due for another call-up. I think he's doing a lot of good work in that kind of tier 2 scene for North America. But yeah, the flex style that he had was electric. So those are kind of my like short list. I had a couple of players. I couldn't just boil it down to one, but that's about it.
See, actually, you did actually the purpose of this show, which is actually use it as a way to talk about good players, etc., etc. Because the problem is, I actually think a lot of people would just cheat on that one. Like, first of all, the obvious answer is simple, isn't it? Like, if you just want to be stupid, he was the fucking best player in the world. He's not even relevant. He doesn't even play the game right now. But actually, I do think it's better. I also did the same thing. I also tried to make it quite loose in this sense. Like, for example, I might miss like Stown or something, but he's still here. He still frags people in the game, you know. Like, same with like Axile. He's still around. He shoots people in the head when he has a chance. He's just not as dynamite. Although I will say that one is one that does bomb me out, because I think to myself, bro, if you could take in a time machine 2022 Axile and bring him to this game, wouldn't he be like one of the stars of the whole game? Like, it would be insane.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you the one that I actually do miss. It's going to be funny because everyone's going to have forgotten about this one, which is going to show how this guy fucked his whole career. It's Yekindar. Bro, Yekindar was a phenom. Like, remember, we didn't have a Donk in that game. We had like Nico and Axile and, you know, these sorts of players. But holy fuck, this guy was unbelievable. I mean, he really was doing that thing where it's like what a fucking alien or a noob would do if they found that page on HLTV where it tells you like 77% of time when the team gets the first kill, they win the round. And they just went, right, well, in that case, we should only focus on getting the first kill. It's like that's what the guy did. There was a couple of years where he just went solo entried or went off like a flash with the most baity fucking team of all time and then just made it 5v4. And then James was sort of like, well, I guess we have to go on the site now. It's like, you know, like he was cracked. This guy was really sick. I even think he was really good when he first got to Liquid before like whatever happened to him. The joke was everyone thought he was going to infused Liquid with all of his shit. If anything, it went the other way around. He became an NA player, was my joke. Not just because he ate all those burgers, his skin went to shit, and then he became not that good at the game. But it's actually really tragic because, bro, he is not only not playing right now, as far as I know, he is completely irrelevant. And it actually hasn't been relevant for 1 second of CS2. It's a fucking insane. Even though what's so mad is he was on top teams, but he wasn't ever relevant. It's crazy. I think I missed the peak of Yekindar. He was really dope, mate.
Yeah, I mean, he revitalized how Banana was approached on Inferno. I think about just how many broken rounds he would have where he's going dry in a lot of these situations. You think about Inferno, you need flashes for every angle. You need to deal with AWPers. He was dry swinging AWPers and he was ripping their heads off. That's how clean his first bullet was, and his crosshair placement was absolutely unreal. And honestly, for Liquid, I think they were a pretty irrelevant team prior to that Yekindar move, because moving into that Cologne that they had with that deep run, he had that stand-in call-up. I was thinking this team was going to need some time for him to kind of show up, but he slotted right in. He infused much needed firepower to make them a competent roster. And yeah, unfortunately, it's just, I guess the IGL ego kind of got to him, and he tried to take that part into his game. But in reality, he never needed to do that in the first place. And you think about CS2 and you think about kind of how his initial playstyle was, I feel like he would actually benefit a lot with the kind of how he wants to peak and how he wants to approach the game. And they even gave him opportunities at the tail end there of his time to kind of be a little bit more aggressive, to have all of those kind of positions, but he never was able to capitalize upon it. And I frankly think that out of all of these players that we've listed, I feel like he's the least likely to become relevant because of just how little firepower that he's really added to the game at any point. So yeah, it's truly unfortunate, but I think that you're exactly right. I think that's probably the best answer that you could give.
Also, by the way, if you're going to cheat and do IGLs, obviously I'll take Glaive, won't I? Because I actually do think what people miss is he never ever had a top team. The joke is the best roster of players he had was probably those 2 lands with the end score before they fucked off to Falcons and Heroic. Like, he actually, in the post-COVID era, he never had the lineup. So, unfortunately, unlike a Carrigan, I never got to actually see what he could do. I always want to know what would have happened if you'd have given him, like, imagine in prettiest way, here's a fucking thought experiment. Imagine you go back in a time machine, and when they kick Alexi B, or you don't recruit Huxley, Glaive comes into that G2 roster with JKS and Huxley. That would be cinema, surely. Wouldn't we get so many questions answered? So, if we're going to cheat and do IGLs, I'll take him. But no, I'll take Yekindar for mine. Right, what is your next question, by the way?
Yeah. Just on the Glaive point, it sucks too, because those 2 lands, I'm pretty sure like the contracts were already being like thought about as well. So they already had one foot out the door, right? Yeah, which is just brutal. But yeah, hope he develops as well. My final question here begs the question, with the hot topic right now with fragging IGLs. It is unreal the kind of dialogue that we've been having with Huxi and Snacks and IGLs that are succeeding in terms of the kind of fragging. As when I look at players like Big Uzera, maybe Blitz, Shuhei, Twist, these guys that are kind of adapting on the fly and trying to make IGLing work as well as fragging. But I wanted to ask the question, are fragging IGLs projected to be a necessity in 2025? And what does history potentially suggest here? Because I'm very curious to see as to where your position is with this.
I mean, I don't even know what the fuck people mean by fragging IGL anymore. Because, for example, almost every single one someone would tell me is a fragging IGL is not even someone who does that role. Like, the joke is, the best statistical one is probably Twists, right? No one even knows if he's a good IGL. So does that even count? Like, I think at that point in time, we're not even having the conversation. So what I don't understand is this. Everyone has said that, no joke, almost every year of CSGO from about, 2015 onwards. Every year they'd go, well, now he has to be able to frag. Because at the same time, we had Pronax, we had Existence, we had all these players that had the low frags, right? What I don't get is, first of all, Carrigan's still right at the top, mate. And he can have halves where he literally can't. The joke is he couldn't hit like a fucking barn with a frying pan. Like, there's halves he can't do anything, mate. I mean, it's why it's the other way around. When Carrigan hits instant headshot, you're like, what? That's just one shot, bro. That's like a noob making a frag movie. Like, you wouldn't put one headshot in a fucking frag movie. You would for a Carrigan one. That's the world we're in. So I just think of all the top teams last year. So Navi has LXCB. Look, I consider him a fragging IGL. But again, how much fragging? Like, it's not much. It's only like they're going to have, first of all, tournaments where they're just as bad as Carrigan. And they're only going to be a tiny little bit in the rating higher. So even the people that get like credit as like, he's better at fragging, that's nearly always just like, in certain scenarios on like one T side or something. So if people tell me Apex, Snacks, LXCB, they're not really that crazy much more than the other guys, mate. So I think if you just look at the teams, G2 had Snacks and Huxley, Vitality had Apex, FaZe had Carrigan, Spirit had Chopper, and we even missing. You know what I mean? Like that, all the top teams have the low fragging IGL. So what's weird is I don't get it because I don't know in history who the fuck these fragging IGLs are that people talk about, or I don't know what they think is coming down the line. Like, spoiler, I'll give you a quick example. I actually think the player Shu here shows this will never be a thing. Because if you ask Ash from Gamer Legion, he'll tell you Shu, he was a completely different IGL in Gamer Legion. It was way more about fragging, putting himself in position. Then he would like work off other people's calls, etc. They say that when he moved to Mouse, they think he just sacrifices everything for the team and just calls. And then the idea is his calls, because he's got such great pieces, win the game. So as far as I can tell, I don't even know if it's something that can be done. Like, and by the way, we're not doing cheap ones. Like, Shox was technically the IGL of G2 2016. If you ever saw Shox and Smiths just ran in and shot, Scream just ran in and shot everyone in the head. Like, he wasn't doing fucking, there was no strat breakdown on that, you know, there was no in-depth shit. So I don't think it was ever a thing personally. And I actually think it won't ever be a thing ever. Like, I think also what's funny is, I'll actually draw a parallel. I almost think people are using the same logic that people actually use in the NFL, where because of the rule changes defensively, there are loads of quarterbacks that are rushing quarterbacks now that go and run, and that read options just 24/7 with some of those guys. That's why they just rack up games. But here's the thing. Does that really mean every quarterback in the NFL has to be able to run? Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. There will always still be the pocket passer who never runs and just throws it and is just really smart. So the problem I have is, even though it's funny because you all did this to yourself, I offered everyone a way out. I was totally fine with Valve not changing coaches talking and then the Mega Brains becoming the coach and then having 5 players that would frag. Since you didn't do that, in my opinion, you will always have a Mega Brain as your IGL, and the Mega Brain is very unlikely is also fragging because his Mega Brain is thinking about the game on a different level. He's like you in StarCraft and the other players are the units. Well, in this scenario, it's like you're asking him to be the unit in Micro while also being the StarCraft commander. Like, I don't know how that would even work. So I love the idea. It's something that is brought up so many times. But first of all, find me this fragging IGL when people make that case, and then let me just watch for 6 months, and either he will prove to be a shit IGL or he just will stop fragging. So I don't really know I don't even know what players they think they're referencing here. Because like the joke also is the same thing with Glaive. People say Glaive's a good fragging IGL. Well, that's because Glaive can frag if he doesn't have to IGL too much. So I think probably what happened is in games where everything was running like clockwork, then he could get his game off. Also, there's that famous story, which is kind of cool, isn't it? Where Zonic used to call the strats in scrims, so Glaive could just frag. Like, I don't know that anyone else has ever done that before or since, by the way. So as far as I know, I don't even know that it's a real question. I know it, but here's the thing. It is endlessly posed, and it is always presented by even the best experts in the world as like, well, starting now you need to frag out. And then I say that, and as I said on Twitter, they keep telling me that, mate. And then I tune in at the end of last year. We're in 2024, by the way. End of 2024. Chopper versus Carrigan grand final. Like, what? So I don't get it myself, mate. I don't get it.
So I wanted to actually go through this statistically, and so I actually went down. I went down through all the IGLs that have won a major. And I tried to basically, we did this conversation about like eras, right? Or the ages, I should say, where we had like the Bronze Age, the Golden Age, the Modern Age. And I consider the last 2 years postmodern. The Bronze Age IGLs, this is probably the weakest in terms of the average. I had like a 0.91 average. We go to the Golden Age and it goes up a little bit. It goes up to about 1.09. But again, this is where you kind of have some outliers with players like Fallen in the conversation who are kind of hitting their peak. And then you keep going a little bit more and you go to the Modern Age and you see 1.1 as an average. But there you've got an outlier in Jame being an IGL who, of course, is always going to be a stat farmer. And lo and behold, the trend the bucking of the trend here is in the last two majors, with Alexi B winning with a .81 being rating in Copenhagen, with being the third lowest player of the entire tournament, and mind you, his second, his other lowest rated player was Ima, who was also in that .8 to .9 range, which is unreal to think about, that they won in that fashion for Copenhagen. And then you think about Chopper, who won Shanghai, he was at a .95. And again, for those last two majors, I'll talk about some of the ratings. So for Shanghai, Kerrigan had a .79 for that major and was in the final. Snacks had a 1.0 and Shuhei had a 1.04. And in the Copenhagen major, Kerrigan had a .94, a .95, a .93. So again, all of these numbers are so negligible. They are so similar to one another across all of these different ages. And sure, you have different variation in slight increases in certain ages, but again, there's always an outlier to kind of bring you back down to earth and tell you and suggest that it's not necessarily true. I do think, like, when you talk about do Hooksy and Snacks belong in these teams, I still would say no, right? And that's not necessarily because they can't frag. It's you're thinking about what are they adding strategically to a team and how is that benefiting the pieces that they have. And you look at players like Alexi B and Kerrigan, and you see how they elevate the pieces that they have and how they look much more strong together as a unit when you look at the weapons that Hooksy and Snacks have had across their career, and it doesn't actually rise up to that challenge. And then you add on top of the rating, and then you kind of have that conundrum of, okay, I don't necessarily think they're the man for the job. But I wanted to go through it statistically to kind of showcase that there has never been a fragging IGL, and I'd really implore you guys at home to kind of go back and view a lot of these big time finals, and you look at the amount of impact that these captains have as in terms of just raw frags, and it is insane the amount of impact that these guys can have. I mean, you'd mentioned Kerrigan, but I was watching back again. I was watching that Cologne documentary with Alexi B, and the amount of times that this guy is bailing them out of situations and making them incompetent situations. But again, they don't have a superstar in certain situations. Sometimes you need to have your captain take it upon themselves to open up rounds. And even now in 2025, where you look at what Chopper's being able to do in kind of elevating Spirit's game, where sometimes they're in hot water and they don't necessarily have everything together, Chopper's kind of bailing them out and still trying to find a way to call a good game. So yeah, I think the question is always going to be posed, and I'm always going to try to keep track of this, but I actually wanted to go back and look at it from a statistical level, and even from the statistical point of view, we've still not gotten to that point where you can suggest and say that there is a fragging IGL and that it will come down the pipeline soon. I think at this point, you've still got to read the game at a very high level. You've still got to have your macro down to a T. And I can see that the exceptional teams that we have moving into this year specifically are either supremely stacked in terms of the firepower, where I look at G2 obviously, and I even look at Vitality in some senses, but I look at the level ups from some IGLs like Major, who has really kind of made that step up. And I think that not even necessarily from a fragging perspective, I'm just seeing how he leads his team has improved significantly. And I think that just from a strategical level, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at those kind of intangible improvements when I look at a demo, and the odd opening here and there to help your team out is very important. But I don't think it's necessarily a definite thing, a necessary thing for these teams. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on that. But overall, statistically even, there is no proving of this idea of a fragging IGL.
The weirdest thing about the opinion is you won't need to make it as an opinion, guys. They'll just be winning the fucking tournaments, and it'll be obvious you have to have that fucking player. Like, how hard is it? The game sorts that out for you. So, Carrigan can't. Well, then why is he fucking win the tournament? So why is he still got titles and finals? Yeah. It wouldn't make any sense, would it? So the last question of the show is actually probably one of the most interesting you could ever ask. It's just people don't ever go this far because modern sports is fucking cancer for narratives. So here's what you do in basketball. You have the same LeBron versus Michael Jordan argument 7 million times with the same points made, and you think he did something. In football, you just go, is it Messi or Ronaldo? And you keep doing the same points, and you think he did did something. Because people aren't actually fans of the sport, mate. If you're a fan of the sport, you have like 100 players that you like to watch. You have people that are never going to win a championship that are sick. I mean, we just did that thing where you wax lyrical about Config. It's been years since he could have won like a major or something. So the question, I think, is a banger. Also, spoiler, did invent this terminology. The question is, who was CSGO's best third star? So people don't know the terminology. I sort of copied it from like Dota farm distribution, where you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions. And in Dota, the idea is 1 and 2 are the main ones that get most of the farm. They tend to be your stars, the carry in the mid. And then off lane, the point of off lane, this is why I picked this particular terminology. The 3 position can either be like a bit more supportive and give the farm to the others, or he can sort of like try and farm up a bit himself, and then sort of it's a bit OP because you have like 2.5 players who can carry the game, if you know what I mean. So essentially, I've always seen the third role in a team, I call it the third star, as like that. I think in some teams, the third star defaults to being more of a team player and a setup guy, and he's not about like raw fragging power. It's more like he's part of the base system and the smarts. Sometimes he's just a straight up one of the best players. You could obviously think in modern days of like people like Malbs when he was on the last G2. Sometimes people just frag your head off, and what we're going for there is like we're going to have insane firepower and all these people hit. So in CSGO, Paladin, who was the best third star?
So this is, I think, the question that I was stumped about for the longest time, because there are a lot of great historical options, and a lot of variety, I think, in that conversation as well. So I couldn't actually come up with one answer. I had 4 that I kind of boiled it down to. I think the one that if gun to my head, I would probably say Magisk. Specifically because of the amount of variety that he would provide as a player, especially on Astralis, where he was definitely one of the greatest anchors in the game. I think nobody can take that away from him. I mean, some of the positions that he was able to hold and revitalize were very impressive. You obviously think about like Pit on Inferno. I mean, you think about how many demos people have broken down in years past and say, oh yeah, this is like Magisk. Well, like he plays this position like Magisk. That simile is always given to that player because he made that role as a whole, and you can never take that away from him. But I will say the caveat in terms of why I love Magisk as much as I do is the gear that he had in on the T side of things as an aggressive rifler as well, where you think about some of the time that he had on North, where he was given a lot of resources, he was able to do a lot there, but then going alongside Dupree on the other end for Astralis was also just super impressive to just see that he had that extra gear on the T side, and that was what made him just so exciting to me. That he just had so much variety and complexity on both sides of the coin. He wasn't just a player that could find ways to be useful on the CT side without any resources, which I think a lot of players have figured out now how to play. But he was the one that I saw that on the T side of things also had a lot to give. Another player that came to mind was Bialy, specifically just because of how spread out the firepower was on VP as a whole. Of course, they don't have all the accolades and all the titles to necessarily bolster this. But the reason why Bialy came to mind was, you think about Snacks, you think about Pasha a lot of the times, but I think Bialy is a player that always goes under the radar, but always is that absolute soldier that is going to give you a stream of frags no matter what happens in a game. And he's not going to have the greatest roles. Some maps he does, some maps he doesn't. But he's always going to give you a certain output that allows for players like, you know, your Pasha Snacks or even your Neos to kind of wake up and provide that extra clutch, to go the extra mile and provide a little bit more. But those two were the players that were kind of on the short list. I had 2 more players, but I wanted to see your picks first before I kind of go through with mine.
I actually personally would probably pick Magisk, but I'll arrive there at the end. So if I went through history and I'm thinking of like greatest teams, and then I'm looking who like as a third star is amazing and does some aspect that's like insane in the game. So if I start at the beginning of CSGO, obviously Freiburg. I mean, he was just a fucking beast. He was unbelievable. A little bit one-dimensional gameplay, but you know what? That was the simple era of the game. You could absolutely do that. It was a totally valid style of play. And by the way, absolutely, he's one of the reasons they won that one major. He was fucking sick at that one too. I go through and I think of This is where you can get cheeky with this one, because obviously it depends on the year. Some years, sometimes your second star flips. So, for example, I would say in 2017, the 2 stars for the SK team was Fur and Cold Zero. So if I have Fallen actually as my 3rd star, he was pretty good still back then. He could win a clutch, mate. He could still be one of the better AWPers. He was still pretty decent IGL. Obviously, from Fnatic, that one's tougher because they all took turns almost being the stars. But I think historically, I would have put, I think even role-wise, it makes, I think Crims is the obvious person you'd pick for that team. I think if you just look traditionally, he obviously gave up things to the other people. He would anchor the small sites, do anything you want on T side. What's crazy, he's never had a bonkers aim, but he's just one of those people that just kills people. You know what I mean? Just puts the gun onto you and he just kills you, just shoots you in the chest and you die. It's a rollback now, but if people go back to the day when Device and Dupree were on top, Kjaerbye was fire, mate. This guy was heat.
Ooh, wow.
This guy could fucking bring a CT off and just beat any team in the world.
Yeah.
I even think another one would be, if you want to think about the era when Envious won that second major, so Kenny S was your best player, but you still had Happy. Bro, Apex is a fucking entry. We know that. I used to have that famous stat. If he hits 20 kills on 2 maps, you are done. Like, you don't come back from a 40-kill Apex series because those others are going to kill you anyway, and then he's just going to pile on. That'll be when they run over you, mate, and destroy you. But I also agree. And also the last one, if you want to think of like 2019 Liquid, Naf's a pretty fucking good 3rd star if you want that, mate. He's got everything, got your clutch. He was even fragging if people don't know back then. He fragged way higher than he did in CS2 now. The reason I would go to Magisk is this, though. I actually think what I just described earlier, he's one of the only ones that did both simultaneously. He essentially played like a star. I mean, people remember, there's a reason why he was winning major MVP and why HLTV had him above Dupree one year, even though the funny thing is, I think me and HLTV went the opposite way. I think I had Dupree higher on 2018 than him higher on 2019. And the reason why is, he's probably one of the best CT players in the fucking world. He was unbelievable. Like you say, you had those positions, fucking overpass B site and then basically A site of Inferno. Like, you can't go to these sites. You're just dead if you come to them. Like, he one-man armies the whole fucking team, even if like that team is like Team Liquid or like Navi running in there. So, yeah, you're right, he has some of the best spray downs ever seen. Also, by the way, his spray really was some of the best ever in CSGO. It's not as good now in CS2. It's just not as much of a thing, and he's just not as good a player. And then the other part is, he also simultaneously, to me, did the sort of brain part where you fit into the squad. Like, I want to point this out to people. The reason why I think he is now CS royalty and he's skating by on the name Magisk and the fact that we blame him the least is because, bro, it's just what he did at that Blast Paris Major. Ziwu was Ziwu. He just got some easy opponents and he was Ziwu. Magisk was fucking unbelievable. I think he might have already had something mad like 1.07 rating, but you go watch the games. It's like if he gets 2 kills, they're the big 2 impact kills. They're like a mid-round kill or like a fucking one where he kills someone who was trying to do a flank and then he comes in and joins the pack. Like, these are the ones where like his brain activation at that time was crazy. I think he'd almost like mastered the sweet spot. It's why people thought he's going to be a secondary caller or an IGL for the rest of his career. He just mastered it. And so I do think he was fucking exceptional. And obviously in this case, he did it in 2 totally different teams as well and won majors with them. So he's kind of got it all. He's got the fucking skills back then. And by the way, the reason why he's OP is, like you said about the North Pute, he wasn't supposed to ever be the 3rd star. It's actually unfair as fuck. Like, there's 2 things a lot of people forget about Astralis, which is Astralis, when they became the GOATs, got Magisk instead of Kjaerbye. That ended up being one of the craziest upgrades ever. And then simultaneously, Valve took Cobblestone, their permaban, out of the map pool. Like, at that point, that's like, whoever works for Valve must just be Kyle Reese and he came back in time to stop like Simple winning all the tournaments or something. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, you just engineered that fucking era. How could they not win in that scenario? So for me, he's number 1, and he has crazy longevity too. Some of the others did it for 1 or 2 years. It's a guy's bonkers longevity. So yeah, that's mine. I'm taking Magisk.
Yeah, I think Fallen was the one that was also there for me on a lot of bases, because Cold Zero and Fur were like that fire and ice that made them so exciting, and you had that little dynamic, and Taco was kind of the glue that brought them together. But I think Fallen also added just that extra dimension of clutch to the team where, you know, if you needed somebody to bail you out sometimes, if the calls weren't necessarily working, he was always there to kind of dig you back into things. He reinvented close range opping. Just finding a way to work how shotgun opping works is just very impressive, and just changing how that role is approached was really impressive. I mean, you think about so many players nowadays that kind of adapt that same kind of play style. Super awesome to see. And then I think the Fnatic angle is interesting, because I think Crims and Flusha were kind of like interchangeable for me, where I was thinking about that. So I'd like to give Flusha a little bit of flour, because I don't necessarily see too many lurks in this conversation as best third star, but man, dude, the way that this guy could just bail you out of rounds, just out of thin air, and just obviously there's that whole conversation of was he cheating? Did he have the kind of like wall hacks? But it's just you see the way he pieces together these clutches, and it really makes you think that he was cheating because of just how incredible he would find ways to make things happen. And the thing was is as his career went on, he didn't necessarily have the necessary ratings to back it up, but he still found those important kills and those clutches to make his role in that team so important. You think about, I think it was Kato that he had in that final where they're playing that best of 5, and he has this crazy train clutch that comes together. I mean, he's doing this at the very tail end of his career. This is like the last year or two that he has altogether, and he still finds ways to find so much impact, and that completely changed the complexion of that map altogether. So yeah, for me, I think Flesha alongside Crims, I think both are interchangeable because yeah, you think about how little Crims had in terms of resources across his career of all the versions of Fnatic that there was, and he still found so much impact as a side anchor, as a bully more aggressively, and still finding that kind of impact. There's a lot of players that you can pick through, but yeah, I think Flesha and Crims were both definitely up there as well.